So joining us now is Veda Austin, and very, very excited to have her here. And Veda, I'll start off by saying I mentioned this to you when I first reached out, but I recently interviewed Dr. Tom Cowan, and I didn't know the interview was going to go in this direction, but we wound up talking about water, a big percentage of that hour we had together. And I just had this epiphany. I had learned a lot about water. I'm very familiar with Dr. Gerald Pollack's work, and I am a big believer in the water that we drink should be, pure and from the earth, and even vortexed and all these things. So I have I guess, above average understanding, but in terms of how water actually impacts our lives on a spiritual level, on a biological level, I was kind of blown away by some of the stuff that Dr. Cowan brought to light, namely that he says that, and I believe this fully, but he says that memories, human memories, are actually preserved in the water in our cells throughout the body. I said to him, so are memories not, electrical impulses like stored like a computer hard drive? Are they saved in the water in your brain or something? And he said, you're partially right. They're stored in the water, but not just in your brain, all over your body. And pretty quickly, I thought about you. I had heard the interview he did with you and was really impressed at the time when I first heard the interview a few months ago. But everything came together in one moment. I had this big epiphany where you were proving that water has memory unequivocally. And so I guess the reason I had this epiphany is because otherwise, without your work, I don't think what Dr. Cowan said to me would have resonated. I'm not sure I would have just immediately have accepted it as possible. But because of your work, what Dr. Cowan said, the fact that memories, everything in our body is stored in the water. The water has a memory. I thought of you. I went back to your website. I really re-listened to that interview and went down the rabbit hole with your work. And I was like, I have to have her on. I have to talk to her about this. So thank you so much for coming on. And I can't wait to dive in and learn more.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And it is difficult for people to grasp that concept, and even to grasp the concept that water can store information. But when I think about that, I think of water itself as awareness. And I think of the salts within it as the part that actually also stores the memory. So when you think about salt is a crystal, and crystals are in all of our technology, and they store vast amounts of information. But when the marriage of salt and water come together, then there is this incredible liquid crystal. And a liquid crystal is like, we're essentially what we are. We're like this liquid crystal antenna. We're picking up so much information from the external world, but we're also picking up all the information from the internal world. I think there's two worlds, the world we live on and the world we live in. And the world we live in is also affected by our thoughts and our feelings and all of these kinds of things that are remembered within this human vessel. And so it is, and then when I think about it, I also think that because we never really think about water in the air, and although we are literally, comforted and supported by all this water that's in the air, and I've always thought that we have this electrical component, of course, which is from the salt within us, with salt's electrical, yep. And so it kind of goes from the fluid part of our body and travels out like how a spider sits in the middle of its web. It's created this web, and something can just brush past the end of the spider web and it can feel it. It can't see it. So it's almost as if the web sort of starts after the body of this feeling energy that comes through the kind of air that's affected by us. It's still, there's an entanglement that is still part of the water that changes its phase. And so that's how we walk into a a room and we can feel its energy, because that kind of invisible web is picking up on what else is left in the air. And so we have this kind of way of feeling that we can't explain. But to me, water explains so many things practically, even down to that phantom arm. You know, if somebody has a missing limb and they have memory of what that arm feels like, and so they can feel it. It's as if it's still there,
right?
Because that would come into the idea of a subtle body is still physically there, kind of, if you not in the physical sense of what I mean, but it is still present within the
energy
in the air. And so there is that encasement almost of like a kind of, it's hard to imagine or explain, but for me, that kind of makes sense, because there's still that memory there of how that feels, and because it's in a subtle form. So yeah, I mean,
incredible.
I know I went off on a whole tangent with that, but
no, but that makes perfect sense. And when you talk about sort of the web that surrounds us all, you know, I don't know a lot about quantum physics, but you know, I am familiar with the idea, at least, that you know, if something moves, a particle moves anywhere in the universe, every other particle moves, or you know, everything is connected. And you know, I know there were some studies recently where some scientists were diving into this phenomenon, and they were able to make, you know, particles move, I forget, you know, 20, 30, 50 miles away from their lab, proving that everything is connected. Do you think that energy kind of spans the world, the globe, the universe? And you know, you say when you walk into a room, you can sense someone's energy. Does the energy of the world, the universe, also permeate us? Can we feel that?
I don't know how we can't. But when you start studying water, what you realize is that water is so ancient. The glass of water that you drink, we just don't even think about it. But when you do, firstly, water seeded the earth from asteroids, so it's an alien substance. Secondly, so it has over 66 anomalous properties. It defies the laws of physics and gravity. By molecular count, we're 99% water. And in that glass, it's been through the clouds, it's been through the earth, it's been through the cows and the trees and the leaves and the butterflies, it's been through the dinosaurs, it's been through your ancestors, and you're about to drink it. And then when you think about the fact that when we drink water, obviously it goes throughout the whole body, but we also expel water. And so that water is always going back to source. Water always goes back to source, just like us. And that's my feeling anyway. And so when I think about this, I'm thinking what we're really observing is that water itself is always on this incredible journey to find itself, just like us. And so when we look for life on other planets, we are always looking for water. That's what I mean. It feels as if water is always in search of itself. It's as if water, for example, just throwing it out there, was in fact expressing its consciousness through us and every other living entity on the planet, simply to observe itself from every perspective. And not just this planet, but potentially every planet and throughout this universe and many other solar systems, then how could we not be all interconnected? When we think about this fact that the water that we've expelled that was inside of us, it flushes down the toilet, goes out into the ocean eventually, and it's evaporated up into the clouds and comes back again, we are essentially, you know, sharing ourselves with everything, and everything is being shared with us. And this water itself, outside of primary water, which is said to have come from the within the Earth's mantle, this alien water that came from goodness knows only where, from different places as well, which would explain why there's different energies and different water sources have different information. You know, it's huge. It's so huge that how could we possibly not be all interconnected? I mean, that's the point. We just are not even aware, I don't think, of the huge amount of potential within us when we really are boiling it all down, pardon the pun, water, salts, minerals, and consciousness. And when you think about water, water accompanies us from the moment of conception throughout life, and even upon death. Water is the thing that goes up, it's evaporated. And what's left eventually is dust and bones, which is salts. Even when you're cremated, the ashes are actually salts. So we're made of these two immortals, essentially, which is water and salt is a crystal. And even when it's, within the cremation process, the salts remain. And water, it's like these two are a marriage. There's not anything alive that's not made of these two things. I always like to make things simple. Look at the very basic things. What are we made of? And when we think about that, we're made of these two immortal shapeshifters, which are just from earth and from space, come together in this vessel. And like Bruce Lee says, he's like, be like water. Water becomes the cup. It becomes the vessel. So are we the vessel or are we the water? And so water has become the body. And we have this idea so much because when we look in the mirror with our fourth phase water eyes, which is the type of gel, it's a liquid, solid, gas, and then a type of gel or plasma. Mm-hmm. And we look at ourselves, but we think we're so solid of skin and hair, and this is what we are. But if our skin was invisible, we would see ourselves in an entirely different way. And we see what a fluid, kind of sophisticated liquid system we really are, and how much is coming in and how much is going out in this constant flow. It's a different way of looking at it.
It is. It's mind-blowing and it's beautiful. One thing that I keep thinking is, people who are inclined towards spirituality, our hippie listeners out there, I think they'll accept this no problem. I think about your average Joe or Jane who lives in this world, and they're, wired like most other people, and don't think about these sort of things. Something like this is hard to probably A, wrap your head around, and B, even accept. I'm curious, first of all, what kind of reception do you get from our, non-hippie spiritual folks that you encounter? Do you find that they're pretty accepting of this principle, this notion, or do they seem to reject it?
Well, to be honest, I never really try to convince anybody of anything. Yeah. So, and I'm very honest about my approach and how this journey for me began. And when people hear how organic it is, and they see that the way in which I've gone about the work I do with water, then there is a kind of a respect, at least, that where I'm coming from is not from a super hippie perspective. I'm very sciencey in many ways. And I like my work is kind of a mix of science and art and consciousness. And what I'm saying is based upon what I'm seeing, so much so, as well as the new science of water. So you mentioned Dr. Gerald Pollack, and he's a very dear friend of mine and a mentor. And he was kind enough to actually write something really, really beautiful in my book. And so what he says is that my work is so extraordinary, but it's actually now up to the science world to prove how this is working. And even Rupert Sheldrake said something amazing about my book. And so I've had some, amazing educated scientists say what they feel. And what they feel is like the work, there's over 10,000 photos of my work. So even if you are just so super sciencey and you go, this is crazy, because most people think, oh, how is this even possible when you see the photos? And people need to bear in mind, I still feel like that. I still go, oh my God, because I'm not the creator. I'm simply, that's why I call it co-creation, because I'm like the medium and water is the artist. The truth is, I'm just taking photos on my iPhone, and the photos that I'm showing people are just what I'm seeing in the ice. And
Right.
I'm teaching the technique so people can also do it. And one of the reasons I did that is so that I can get a body of work to prove that it's not just me and my connection with water that's extra special, but we're all extra special, and we do all have connections with water because we're bodies of water having connections with everybody else. And so I tend to like to work in different worlds and kind of bridge different worlds, I hope. Of course, the traditional scientist or scientific way of approaching this, I actually had something very profound happen several years ago. There's some people that I were working with, they wanted some more scientific kind of proof of how my method works. And we'll probably share some photos soon and stuff so people can know what we're going on about.
Yep.
But in a nutshell, I call it CMP, or collective molecular photography, what I do. So essentially what I will do is influence, or I rather would inspire water in some way, like water in a petri dish. So I get like my petri dish here, and I'll put a little bit of water in it, and like I'll think something, and then I'll then put it into the freezer for a specific amount of time. It's actually under 5 minutes. I used to freeze it completely, but as I got to understand these different phases of water, and I used to pull the petri dish out sooner and sooner and sooner, earlier and earlier and earlier, and I started to see something really amazing, that there's two types of water in water. So there's informed water and uninformed water, and the informed water adheres to the glass bottom of the petri dish very, very quickly, within minutes. And then there's an uninformed kind of water which stays fluid much longer. So I only photograph the water in which is informed, and it gives me this 3D-like kind of crystal architecture. And it's very thin, but it's so fast, you wouldn't believe it. And so, but I used to just let it completely freeze, and I still got images in that way. And so what I would see when I pull it out would be a reflection or an artistic expression of the influence. So if I thought of a hand, I'd see a hand. If I thought of something like a butterfly, I'd see a butterfly. And as my relationship with water developed closer and closer, and it became like this kind of bond formed. And so it happened more and more regularly. So in the beginning, when I first started doing this, I'd have like 1 in every 10 or so. That would be like really amazing. And then as my relationship grew over the last 8 and a bit years, it started to become more like 1 in every 8, and then 1 in every 5, and then 1 in every 2. And now it's pretty much every time. And that's because I've almost stopped thinking. Now, what I realize is that water seems to know what I'm going to think before I even think it. I've just put water in a petri dish and frozen it without any thought that I thought I had. And then a few hours later, and then I'd pull it out and I'd photograph it. And the last one I did was, there was this kind of obelisk in the ice. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. And it was a very specific shape. And a few hours later, a girlfriend of mine, she came over and she said, oh, I just put this amazing crystal, have a look at this. And it was like this perfect obelisk. And I'm like, she said, have you ever seen anything like it? I'm like, well, actually,
Oh my gosh.
take a look at this.
That is
so
insane.
I'm being shown things that are about to happen. And that's happened multiple times now. So the more, it's almost as if, when you have a friendship and you just trust that friend, and there's some unspoken stuff between you that you just know about each other, and you can just trust them to show up in a certain way. But in the beginning of the friendship, you're getting to know someone, and there's a formality or whatever it is. And so it is it is much like relationship in so many ways.
Yeah, I want to trace sort of your background and how you got to this point. But I can't, before we get to that point, I can't help but ask you, have you thought about, and I assume you have, but could you ask the water things about your future?
I'm sure you could. I'm just going to pull you down here a little bit. I'm absolutely sure you could. I haven't, because I don't feel the need to, because in some part of that, there is the curiosity, but where is the curiosity coming from?
Right.
And so it is that, I've learned I really have to be mindful of my questions and wonder where they come from. Is it coming from a place of simple curiosity to see what water will show me? Or do I really want to know what's going on in my future for some other reason? Is there an ego-driven part of that? Or
Right.
is it simple and sweet and kind and real? It does force me to be in integrity, and there's lots of things I could have asked about myself if I had wanted to, and then I tend to choose not to. I just love what water is ready to share, and I know because you were asking about how I don't know. I mean, everybody is special to me. That's how I feel it. But, people that are perhaps not open to a lot of things in that way and have
Yes.
a more black and white way of seeing life. And my eldest son is very much like that. He's just very practical, and I love that about him, because he also helps me. I did this thing, because he's been watching my work for a long time, and he's developed more of a respect, because the body of work has grown and grown and grown and grown. And now it's like he's seeing that other people are going, wow, this is amazing. But he asked me a really important question. That's why it's great to have teenagers and children to give you new perspectives. And I did a lot of work with music and water, because Masaru Emoto, and he was also not embraced by the scientific community, but his work still, I think, opened the door towards people being able to view themselves as bodies of water, and that thoughts create things externally and internally. And so, but he did some work very much in contrast with water, where he did classical studies compared to heavy metal. And he never did much other kind of music other than classical and heavy metal. And whoever was doing heavy metal probably didn't really like the heavy metal who was doing that test.
Right.
But I feel that there is a judgment, not necessarily from those people, but there was an assumption that heavy metal is bad. Personally, I'm not a heavy metal fan, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It's more around water's expression. So I wanted to allow water to be able to express itself in lots of different genres of music, because my son, he said to me, well, Mum, I really like rap. So if I'm just listening to rap all day in the car and water only likes classical music, then, what's going on in my body? I'm like, it's a really great point. And so, I did Tupac, and I did all different genres, and it was so awesome. And I did Guns N' Roses, and I did some classical, and I did some kind of just some rock, and some the sound of Om, and some Buddhist chants, and this big variety, and some jazz. And water just expressed itself in all these cool different ways. And some were very, very kind of I did one of the sound of a gong, expecting it to look like the sound of Om, which I'll share soon, which is the circular kind of universal pattern. And I did repeat studies of that. So that's the other part that Jerry Pollack actually really suggested to me. Make sure people understand that in your repeated studies, which are very important, where you've used the same influence over and over again, that they know you're not taking hundreds of photos and choosing the best one.
Right.
I actually can't do that, because I'm doing most of this in my kitchen, and it's hot, and the ice melts really fast. So I can only take 2 or 3 good photos at a time. So it's not that I'm not in a cold room doing, I'm actually organically taking these photos. So, so what you're seeing is what you get.
Right. And for the
And
sciencey people, this is repeatable. You know, you can get the similar results over and over again.
And that's what I'm seeing. So with the sound of the gong, I had this silly assumption that it would look somewhat like the pattern.
Makes sense.
But it didn't. It actually designed the gong with the round gong with this mallet on top, just to prove me wrong. And so when you see the work, you kind of get more of a sense for it. But I'm very much interested in staying the observer, without too much, like we have this idea that we need to influence. So people often say to me, well, you know, I mean, will the peas and the, you know, whatever you've got in the freezer influence the water when it's in there? And I think things that are frozen are sort of in a state of suspension. So I say you don't have to worry about that. It's always good to have a flat surface though, and don't like have it on top of the whatever the frozen thing is in there.
Yep.
But there's this understanding, even at the last water conference I was at, there was a lot of talk around, but, you know, were there other influences? Were there people in the room with that as the influence? So even saying that over and over again says that water is that sensitive that it can pick up information, that it can be influenced. I actually personally think it's the influencer, but that's my personal view, because I think we're made up of all of this water, and that in fact where we are, our environment really creates, it really impacts us. So I'm very fortunate right now to be surrounded by this amazing water, and I can feel the shift in myself. So as water is influencing the water in me. So, I mean, perhaps I should just kind of start.
Sure. Yeah, please.
So many places to go, but I am, you know, I'm out there saying, I actually don't know how this is happening, how this work is working. I have my theories. I'm never claiming that I know what's happening, but the most, you know, like someone said to me that the job of a scientist is also to reveal what the findings are. So I'm revealing the findings. It's really up to the people that know how, I mean, to try and figure out how it's working. That much I don't really know, but I'm presenting the evidence as I see it. And, you know, my book has hundreds of photos of this, but I literally have thousands of my phone, God bless it, it's got like, you know, thousands and thousands of photos on there. And so, I mean, that's the mind-blowing part, and the probably most scientific part. That if people really are looking at it, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or even 5 photos that look like what the influence was might be passed off as a coincidence. Thousands,
no chance.
That's a little more difficult. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, yeah, let's dive in, and I'm excited to see.
Sure. I'm just going to do the screen share. So, so I started out with this question, like, where did water come from? So I'll just push play up here. And that was like a really important question. And we've covered this, you know, obviously it's at least 70% of what's on top of the surface of the Earth came from asteroids that seeded the planet, making it this alien substance. So what if this alien substance that is water could communicate with you? And what if it could read your mind and show you your thoughts through the method of freezing? And that sounds like quite a crazy thing to just throw out there, but that came from some people that inspired me and from my own self-inquiry. And so I mentioned Masaru Emoto. So his work was very much in contrast. You can see the water crystals that say from the word you fall, and the water crystal that developed from the word thank you. And because it's so contrasting, and that a picture speaks 1,000 words, what we see really, it makes a difference. You show this to a child and they are blown away by how it makes them feel when your eyes take that in and you go, wow, you know, that's really powerful to see. And so I liked that kind of visual aspect of it, but he's taking like microscopic photographs. And so another person that inspired me was Laurent Costa. He's not as well known, but I really wish he was. He's a French photographer, and his book is called Journey into the Heart of Water. And what was so cool about his work is that he's showing pictures, he's taking microscopic photographs of water, but rather than use or be the influencer, like in Emoto's work, he's got influencers. Laurent doesn't do anything. He has this also as more, his spiritual relationship with water is much like myself, in that we love to allow water to reveal itself. And so he's got images that we can relate to as humans, like a heart means something to me and a smiley face makes me feel good. And he has some other smiley faces that he's got here, which is super cute. And so the other, I don't have a photo of him, but the other person that influenced me, his name was Thomas Hieronymus. He was a radionic engineer, and he made an observation when he went into a Parisian meat market. He observed that the freshly placed organs of an animal appeared to be affecting the way the frost froze on the glass behind them. So the liver organ appeared to be affecting the frost so that it formed into the shape of a liver organ. Same with the brain, etc., etc. And he thought that even though the organ itself was not alive, it wasn't connected to a body anymore, it still held some kind of life force energy that emanated out of it due to the water content in the blood. And I found that really interesting. So I put all of these together, like water is this alien substance and it can design and create in imagery and in geometry. I'm like, okay, this is all cool to read about this stuff, but like, what can I do? You know, I didn't have a microscope at the time. And so I'm like, well, you know, I have some amazing water because I had a profound healing experience with a very specific type of water from New Zealand, from the spring water. And so I thought, well, I am going to use some of that water. I'm going to put some of that water into the Petri dish. I'm going to project a thought or something, and I'm going to freeze it, because the common thread between them all was that even through the seeding of the planet, it's the water that came to Earth was in ice form. So there's this thing about ice throughout all of these, where it's frozen, where water kind of uses its building blocks of ice to design like an incredible architect. And so I thought, okay, I need to freeze the water and I'm going to just see what happens. You know, it was just, I had no expectation of what I might get. So I got my Petri dish of water, and I was going to think something, but then I organically thought something because there was some fluff floating around in the water. So I was like, so I put my hand in and took the fluff out. But I consciously thought, I wonder if my hand will have any impact on the water's, you know, memory, because I didn't really understand or believe, or not necessarily, it's not that I didn't believe it. I just wanted to see it for myself, because I think self-inquiry is really important. Don't believe everything you read, go and find out for yourself. And so I put it in the freezer and I pulled it out hours later, and I held it up to the light and I took a photograph of it. And this is the photo that I took.
Whoa.
And I was kind of freaked out. Like the first time this happened, I'm like, no, this is crazy weird. And
this is your first ever attempt?
First ever attempt. And so I'm like, oh God, okay. So I showed it to my son Rama, and I said, the photo, and I said, hey Rama, what does this look like to you? Because I wanted to make sure it wasn't just me that thought it looked like a hand. And he said, oh, it's a hand, Mum. And then I'm thinking about informed water, and I'm like, okay, at the time I lived at a different beach. And so I went and got some seawater, and I did the same thing. And I got this cool fish shape in the water with this perfectly round eye and his little fins at the top. And you can see he, and his tail, he's super cute. And the feathering is kind of indicative of what I often see in salt water. It freezes differently than fresh water. So that's, of course, when my freezer became my most used household appliance. And I started doing all kinds of different, you know, tests. And so I saw that water liked to design in images. And so I thought, well, I'd use the influence of imagery and photos to see if it would reflect back what it was being exposed to. So the first photo I showed was my friend Wendy, her photo on the right, and the image you can see is on the left. And this is when I changed my technique. So this is where I started to take water out earlier, and you can see it has more dimension and light in it. And there's actually a thinner layer of ice. So compared to the hand.
How zoomed in is this, that photo?
Which is there. I have some, I don't have it on here, but in my book, I've got the backed out version. So lots of people go, oh my God. So they vary between being about a third to a half to the whole dish, and in variants of that.
Gotcha.
So
wow.
This, I can't really remember it, but
yeah. Well,
they're huge macroscopic terms. So everything we were seeing prior was apart from Hieronymus's work, which we never saw. I wish he'd photographed that, but you know, it was microscopic.
Right.
But
this is
not.
Yeah, you can see with the naked eye.
Looking at it. Then my friend Laurent, who we were just talking about, he sent me his photo and he said, "Can you show this to the water for me?" And so I did, and it took his profile photo basically.
Wow.
And so then I had this photograph of my daughter's braid. So often what I'll do is, I love it too. And I'll print these pictures out, and I'll put the Petri dishes on top of them for 30 seconds. There's no real rhyme or reason why I chose 30 seconds, except that I know it can be 2 seconds, but 30 seconds seems like a reasonably good time, and it's half a minute. So, but the fact that this went in liquid and came out as a braid is like, I mean, like, I get blown away by this still. So you can see what I've done here. I was studying electrical conductivity, and I liked the black and white image. So I printed it out and put the Petri dish of water on it, and then froze it. And you can see, so this is quite good, because you can see that this is in my in-between stage between freezing it completely and taking it out earlier. So you can kind of see the stages of it. This is cool. This is a Van Gogh painting of sunflowers, and you can see that water's made its own expression of it. And I love water's one as well. It's so unique. And the colors that come through, a lot of people ask me, how come there's so many colors? And I because there's a thin layer, and I often am in places where there's a lot of windows and a lot of different light and color, I like that those different colors come through, because it adds to a more artistic expression.
Absolutely.
You could, of course, set it up in a lab and do it in a different way and have it, you know, with no color coming through. That's just not my style, but other people can do that if they want.
Sure.
My son likes dinosaurs. This was a few years ago though. And what was cool about this was that he did this, and we saw that the water had actually designed the pupil to be round rather than like a slit cat's eye.
Yeah.
And my son was like, well, maybe water knows something about dinosaurs that we don't. And I'm like, well, who knows? You know, it was around then. So then this is cool. I just used the cow as the influence. But somebody actually said to me, why did you outline it? You know, why did you do that in the ice picture? I'm like, I didn't. That's not a marker pen. That's the ice.
That
and
is
you can even
nuts.
see the light in the cow's eye. Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. This is a whale shark, and you can see the design that water has created. It's actually amazing. I love this picture.
It is.
It's really cool.
Beautiful.
It's beautiful. So then I'm like, well, you know, just because we're humans doesn't mean we're the only people the only things that influence things on the planet. So animals must have some kind of co-creation with water. So my cat Jiva, he's like, it's interesting because I will often put my Petri dishes on the ground because, well, for various different tests that I do, I won't get into it. And Jiva's always attracted to them. He's always trying to fish something out of them. And there's nothing that we can see in them, but I swear he sees there's something in the water that he's trying to get out. And so in this one, the water obviously saw his little paw. and Jiva looking at the petri dish of water, and that's all he did. It was 2-3 seconds. He just looked at it, and then we can see it's designed as 2 eyes and his little nose and his ears, and super cute. And I love this picture because it looks like an etching. It looks like someone decided to do some kind of painting or like etching of a dog.
Yeah,
so
it does.
The story behind this was that I was at a cafe, and I saw this little schnauzer dog that looks like the one on the right, and drinking from the dog bowl that they'd left out for all the thirsty dogs. And so I kind of said to the lady, the waitress, I said, I know this is going to be like sound totally crazy, but could I get a takeaway cup of some of that dog bowl water? And she like looked at me like, what?
Oh.
So it was her weirdest ever request from a customer. But anyways,
it's so funny.
In good spirit, she let me. She thought, oh God, if she's that desperate, I might as well let her have it. So I froze that water, and I got this amazing image, and I was blown away by this.
That is
one.
Nuts.
It's really amazing. This doesn't look amazing, but the story behind it gives it its value. So I wanted to see, much like Hieronymus talks about that life force energy that emanates from a body, as whether it's alive or dead. And so my daughter was out in the garden, and she found all these worms in the earth. She was doing some gardening, and she was showing me the worms. And so I got a petri dish with no water in it. And I put 2 worms in the petri dish, and they wiggled around, and then I put them back in the earth, and then I put a little water in the petri dish and froze it, and it showed the 2 worms that were in there. And so the water picked up on their life force energy, or perhaps because I use only glass petri dishes, and glass is essentially silica, and silica is a crystal, and it's storing information, so perhaps that helped store the memory. Either way, it's pretty amazing.
Either way, it's amazing. Yep.
I did exactly the same thing with a monarch butterfly the caterpillar. And I got the caterpillar in the ice. So then I started, I'm right out on the edge, and there is nothing stopping me from asking some pretty amazing questions. And that's the cool thing. When you're doing your own thing, you do your own thing, and you're not limited to what you can do. So I started talking. I just talking to water and then freezing it. It's like, I know it sounds nuts, but when you actually see the communication back, it's not so nuts.
Who's nuts now? Yep.
So I said, do you see me?
Whoa.
And I got these like 3 eyes. And so the fact that there's 3 is no coincidence. I don't think so. It's
third eye?
Well, maybe, but the fact that they're just eyeballs. And it's like, it's like eyeballs without the head or the body or anything. So it's almost as if water itself can see without eyes, and can feel without a heart, and think without a brain, and remember, without the type of anatomy that we believe is part of our whole functionality. So, so I asked the water, do you know who I am? And so I had the picture on the right is just for comparison. I didn't show this to the water at all.
Gotcha.
But that's exactly how I link my initials. And so I always link my initials like that. And so the water has really kind of given me an upgraded version of my initials. And this was quite large in the petri dish as well. And the backed out version is also in my book. So I really had to do that for people. I had to show the backed out versions, because people were like, how is this real? And I'm so useless with the kind of techno stuff. I wouldn't even know how to
manipulate it. Photoshop.
No. I said, can you see spirits? And so this is a really interesting picture, because although it looks like the water is liquid, it was actually solid, surrounded by liquid, surrounded by so there's that area in the middle that looks kind of liquid, even though it's solid. And then around it was the areas that looked more solid. And I had to touch it actually to make sure that it wasn't liquid, because in my brain that didn't make sense. Yeah. And so it shows this kind of face with the type of body, which looks completely different than any other photo I've taken. And it's like this strange, interesting kind of formation has formed in the ice that literally doesn't even make sense. So I don't even know.
I got goosebumps. I don't know what to say about that one. That is crazy.
Yeah. I said the word Maui, and for the people who don't know, it's a name. In New Zealand, the name Maui, people think about the Maori, like the Maori warrior, who was said to have fished up the North Island of New Zealand with his grandmother's jawbone made into the shape of a hook. And so this sort of showing like the power of a name, and it's designed this cool fish hook. I said with a lot of respect, I said the word shalom, and this incredible image appeared, which some people think looks like an archangel or Yeshua or something of that nature.
Whatever it is, it's beautiful.
Yeah. And I said, can you connect to my mom? And this ties in with the idea that water somehow is the link between this world and other worlds, not just other universes, but other realms, perhaps. And so I used to live in Japan, and I wonder if I need to move. Let's just say my internet is a little unstable. Can you see okay?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So I said, can you connect to my mum? And so I used to live in Japan, and mum and I would write letters to each other. This was before the days of emails. And at the end of every letter, my mother would draw a circle with a heart inside. But her circles were never that great. Mum would be the first to say she was never the best artist in the world. And they always looked like misshapen roti. And so when I saw the image on the left, which was the first one, I'm like, oh my God, it was like somehow mum had managed to design a picture for me to say, I'm here. And then I did it a year later, and this other image, which looks similar, although more oval, appeared. And the picture on the right is a picture of me and mum.
Oh my gosh. How did you respond when you saw this?
Honestly, it was very personal. It took me a long time to even share this because it was such a personal picture. And my relationship with my mum was so incredibly strong and special. She was a walking angel, and she was taken way too early. And but I do feel, she's cheering me on up there with all her endless cups of teas, and it's nice to see these things of which I've always felt and thought inside of myself and my personal thoughts, that through the transition from the physical into another, it kind of goes into another phase, just like we see with water. It's always reincarnating.
It still exists, it's just in a different phase.
Just in a different phase, exactly. Yeah. So then I said, show me life on another planet. And I'm like, oh, it looks like a scene from Star Wars. It's like,
it does.
It's really kind of cool. And then I said, please show me something on Earth that was inspired by aliens.
Whoa.
And so I haven't shared this photo yet, but the ice image showed this incredible design, which looks so much like the Mayan pyramid at Tikal.
Yes.
And what was interesting is at that particular place in Guatemala, they also found these figurines that were said kind of called alien astronauts. And so the link is so cool. And when you really look at that design, you can see it's almost as if there's kind of clouds going up, and you can see the steps, and it's very dramatic. So I asked the same question again sometime later, and I got this pyramid 3D kind of image of an alien, aerial view of a pyramid that looks much more like the ones in Giza.
Yeah.
And so this kind of line of questioning is always open for interpretation, but water is showing us something really intriguing. And so I kind of started continuing on with that, which I'll get into in a minute. So going with the kind of Egyptian theme, I used a hieroglyphic tablet as one of my repeat studies. So there were three, I printed it out and I put 3 petri dishes of water on top of the image you see at the bottom right.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can see how similar they all are.
Yeah.
Except what I keep finding is the more repeat studies I do, the more angles water likes to show. So from different, so from underneath or around the side or above, it kind of does all these different views.
I'm going to show you a different perspective each time. Yeah.
Yeah. So I use media quite a bit because we are all often influenced in one way or another by media. And for this particular one, I'm sharing it mainly just because I have so many of them. So I did 3 at a time, literally sat them on the couch to watch The Passion of the Christ. And I've used other ones like Jaws and like Batman and all different kinds. Yeah. And then I left the room and came back and froze them. And the first 3 gave me the crucifix, and then I did it months later. And the second lot of 3 gave me this crucifix, which is...
It's interesting, that second row, it's more, all 3 are more zoomed out.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
It is.
So this was what I was talking about earlier about the sound of Om. And it likes to create these round designs. It's kind of universal. And you can see how big that is. In all of them, you can see most of the Petri dish.
Yeah.
So, you know, my Petri dishes, they're pretty big. So it's like, these are big images, right?
Yeah.
So this is one of my other repeated tests kind of going on from these sort of extraterrestrial influences. Yeah. So I used the word alien. So I use these different methods. I'll write a word sometimes and put the Petri dish of water on top of the word and then take it off and freeze it. And so for this first one, and also I'll say that sometimes it's as if, well, most of the time, it's as if there's a different artist painting the same or designing the same picture, as if there were a ton of people in a room and there's one subject and they all have to paint the subject, but each person's going to do it slightly differently, but it's the same subject. So in this particular repeat study, I'm seeing the same thing. So when I wrote the word alien, this head appeared, which reminds me of one of the crystal skulls, you know, from Indiana Jones or something. Or,
totally.
And for this second one, I used the word alien, and this one looks more like, you know, with the elongated skull, it looks like this Egyptian hieroglyph.
Yeah.
And that's the common thread between them all. They all have elongated skulls. Same with this one, looks more like a gray, what people might term as a gray, with that kind of long skull, and it's a different form again. So those 3 repeated studies show 3 different, very different, you know, designs of aliens, essentially, from the word. I mean, it's however you perceive the word, or maybe how I perceive the word, I don't really know yet.
What if you had 3 different people say the word alien, you and your son and somebody else?
Yeah, we're bound to see different things.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is also every time you use a water, so I use lots of different types of water. Lots of people ask me that, and I often forget to mention it. So I use spring water, I use seawater, I use different types of spring water. I use rainwater sometimes, you know, but I don't like to use distilled water, because what I found is it never shows complex imagery. I think that then relates into my idea about salt storing memory. But there's, you know, you can use all kinds, but I found the best kinds come from natural springs, and especially if you can get it directly from source. But each time you get it, you're getting another type, a new water, essentially. So it's almost like every molecule is like its own individual person that then has all its own individual kind of molecules within it. It's like the idea, if you imagine or thought about that, then the amount of information that could be stored is just so fathomless, it's impossible to almost imagine.
What about easy water and Gerald Pollack's water that he studies? I know there's a way you can sort of structure your own water. Have you played with that?
Many times. Another part of what I do, the more sciencey area, I suppose, is being able to prove and show waters, the crystallography of the qualitative aspects of water. So each water has its own kind of signature pattern. So tap water has a very specific look about it. It's quite disordered. It has little lines and dots, but it doesn't show any complex geometry. Whereas if you took water directly out of a spring, you'll see these beautiful hexagonal patterns, much like snowflakes, only slightly different in that each pattern has, each star kind of has these ferns around it, and then it's formed into this hexagonal shape. And then there's this process of degradation. So I can show how as water goes through right angles, it starts to degrade in its crystallography. And so the more right angles it's gone through, by the time it comes out of your tap, it's gone through so many that it's become more disordered. And so also when water and molecules go through right angles, they lose an electron. So they don't actually have the same format essentially anymore. So they're not as charged. So, but I've also been able to prove how water can improve from that state through things like vortexing, even just using a spoon and stirring it, and through infrared light, and through filtering it through silk, and through consciousness. So you can have all these physical modalities that will improve it. But the biggest changes I've ever seen have come from conscious awareness. So the water itself, like I've said, when you look at an analysis, well, I haven't said this, but it ties into something I did say. But when you look at an analysis, you read all of the things that are in the water, you know, the total dissolved solids, the boron, the chloride, blah, blah, blah. So what you're reading, though, is what water holds. So what about the water itself? Like, if you took all that stuff out of it and made it whatever the pure is, then what is that? And so I think of that as water certainly has an energetic state of health. And I see that because tap water still holds all of the stuff in it that's not, that the heavy metals, the various different additives and chemicals, but structurally it can completely be transformed with somebody just holding a bottle of water to their chest lovingly. Structurally, that can heal. So it's sort of like somebody who is very sick and feeling really bad, and somebody gives them a huge hug. It's not that they're not sick anymore, but their emotional state is improved. It's that power of conscious caring. It's very real.
And that also impacts the water more than anything you found.
Yes, yes. Well, the quickest. It just goes from 0 to hero. And depending on your state of love. I wasn't going to say state of mind, because sometimes it's like it's like if you can bring the mind and the heart together, I think that union brings about something very powerful. In fact, the most powerful photo I took the very sad tap water, and my children and I sent love to the water. But the thing we did that was different was we also sent love to each other. And that created the most beautiful hexagonal pattern in the ice. And the larger, bigger is better when it comes to crystallography like that. So the larger the hexagon, the more powerful that energetic expression is. So in the photo we're looking at, I held a glass of water and held it up and looked through it at the tree on the right. And you can see that water's designed what I saw. So this is an important photograph. So the photo on the left was water that I took from an area which had a lot of Maori settlement, which was around over 100 years ago. And I was looking at that image going, you know what, that reminds me of a pātaka, which is these food storage huts that were built on stilts that the Maori made to kind of stop a lot of predators from getting up into the food. Mm-hmm. And they would sometimes store water in gourds in these huts. And as I was looking at that, I started researching the area, and I found this historical sketch on the right that when I put them together, I'm like, oh my gosh, because you can see the second one in the background of the ice picture. I'm like, this is this. So it was because water had shown me that picture and that it reminded me of that I started doing the research and found the photo to the left, to the right, which is really incredible.
It is incredible.
This one's fairly self-explanatory, really. But what's kind of cool is that wasn't long after I took that photo that I actually chipped my thumb. So it's like water showed me something that was about to happen.
Wow.
I mean, my thumbnail.
Yeah.
And this, I like chocolate. So I mean, I don't drink or do any or smoke or do any of things like that. And I've been vegetarian since I was 8, but I love to have chocolate.
This is your one vice.
What if we? Well, I think everybody should have a little bit of chocolate every now and then if they like it. But anyway, you can see that water designed it. And I used the broccoli water, and it designed the broccoli. It's almost like the broccoli was cut in half.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
This is also self-explanatory. You can actually see what I did. I do a lot of what seem like random things sometimes, but there's usually always some story behind them. This is an important photo. So I used the butter knife as the influence. I just took a photo of it for my reference. But what you can see is the water's designed the butter knife, but it was also shown me that it's seen the 2 coasters that were in the background.
Yeah.
That wasn't part of the test, which is important to remember, that water is showing that it's observing much more than we think. The influence of media. So this is a powerful picture. I've outlined the pigs for you to see, but they're fairly clear without the outline. But I showed water, my petri dish of water, this YouTube video of this pig that actually jumped out of a moving truck because it wanted to escape from being taken to slaughter. And so the water's really shown like a sketch almost of this poor pig. But what it showed that you didn't see in the video was a second pig. And this makes me think that there was probably a second pig that was trying to jump out with the first one. And it's again water's showing us that it can see what we might not be able to see. And it's a very powerful picture, this one, for me.
It is.
I mentioned before, my son wanted me to do this one. So you can see how big it is because you can see the side of the petri dish.
Yeah.
And yeah, but that's obvious what that was.
Super cool. Yeah.
It's super cool. This one was from Jaws.
Whoa.
A very big Jawsy picture. And I used this image actually for the cover of my book because I just loved the designs and the color and the profile and the shape from the movie Avatar. It's a powerful movie. And so I used the influence of words. So this cool image came from, I sat it on top of a wedding invitation I was sent, but there were no actual rings on the invitation. The main word I sat the petri dish on was wedding. And so it designed something that I've never seen before being able to recreate at all. Like even I tried to make water reuse as a bubble. Do you know how hard it is to do that? So how this has happened, I don't know.
Wow.
It's pretty cool. I use the word Pugione, which is Latin for dagger, because people have often said, can you understand different languages? Well, of course, but it's fun to prove it.
Yeah.
And so my daughter did this one. She used the word unicorn because she likes unicorns and magic and fairies. And it looks like a scene out of the movie Frozen.
Yeah.
So, and I used the word angel. This is pretty beautiful. You see the outline of the body and the wings.
Yes.
This is a relatively recent one I did called, I just used the word antenna, and it looks like a dipole antenna.
I see it, yeah.
I really love this picture, and I think this is an important photo that a lot of people overlook because it doesn't look like something specific, but it looks like something very metallic that's in the water. This is liquid, right, when it went in. And this thing looks like some metal object that's literally in the ice, and there's that round thing kind of in the front of it. And it's not like it does look artificial, and I don't really know what is showing me here, but sometimes it's almost reminiscent of like Elon Musk's kind of Neuralink thing that he wants people to put in their brains or something. But it is, yeah, it's pretty amazing picture, that one.
Yes.
And then I just used thoughts. So I didn't even do this one my son did all this as well as take the photo. His name is Rama, and we were talking about his name as in Lord Rama with a Hindu god, and Lord Rama always has a bow and arrow. And so he thought of an arrow, and he did all of this himself. So that's also proof that it's not just me.
Right.
And his photo is amazing. I thought of a shooting star, and I thought of the man in the moon. So, and then there's remote ones, remote thought. So I asked a friend of mine who lives in India, I rang her up and I said, look, I've only done 2 of these, but I'm working, I mean, there's so much to do, still to do. But I said to her, could you please project a thought from India to my petri dish of water on the bench here in New Zealand? And just think of something, don't tell me what it is. And so she did that, and I pulled this image out, and she was like, oh my God, let me tell you what I was thinking. So what I did already know about her, but I didn't know what she was thinking at the time, she has had this really dramatic fear of drowning her whole life, to extreme degree. She's never bathed. She's always, her showers are, and in India you do this a lot, where you stand in a bucket and you use like a cup and you shower yourself that way. That's the closest she's felt comfortable to being in water. And it got so bad and so bad and so much worse that over in the last year and a bit, she started having therapy, and the therapist said to her, just start with imagining yourself in water. So when she imagines in water, she thinks, she's a Hindu, so she thinks, well, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die in the Ganges. And so she imagines she's standing on a rock with her head above water in the Ganges, and that was what she was thinking.
Oh my
From India
God.
to New Zealand. What? So I did another one. And so with this one, I rang a friend of mine that lives in the States, and I said to her, hey, she knows about my work. I said, could you project a thought, please, into my petri dish? And the same thing. But as I was talking to her, her husband came round in the Zoom call and like waved at me, and she'd recently got married. I'd never met him before, and I don't catch up with her too often, so I really didn't know anything much about this guy. And he seemed like a nice man though, and I said, hey, let's make it really random. Why don't you ask him if he'll do this? And so he was a good sport, and so he thought of something, projected it, and then kind of went away. And when I sent her the photo, she showed it to him, and she said his face like went white. Because, okay, so I'm a vegetarian. This is not something I'd ever think. He was a hunter, and he was planning on going hunting for pheasant. And
Wow.
So you can see that the outline of a bird in this with a hand holding this bird.
Yes.
And so, and it kind of got this long tail like a pheasant does. And he was like kind of freaked out.
Blown away.
But this was because of him. It had nothing to do with me, except I kind of was the medium of holding the petri dish and putting it in the freezer. Which is incredible. So then I worked on emotions. So these are some repeat studies I've done, but I mean, these are quite extensive now, but just using them as examples. What's really sweet is that water shows love, the feeling of love in these heart shapes, which is interesting because for gratitude, which we'll see in a minute, it shows those kind of beautiful fern hexagons I talked about in water in a state of health, whereas the feeling of love shows something very human, like where we associate a heart with love. Mm-hmm. The feeling of stress, which so many of us understand, it can sometimes feel kind of spiky, and so water designed it like spikes. And
so with this, you try to project that feeling, you get in that state?
I just sit in the feeling of these, and the hardest one for me was frustration and anger, but every now and then we can remember, if we just go back through the catalogue of memories in our lives, we can always go back into the memory of when we felt angry or frustrated. We've all felt like that, even if you're the most lovely person, sooner or later, even when you were a child, there's some memory in there of frustration and anger, and you're surely a highly evolved being, in which there are some out there, of course. But you can see these hexagonal ferns I was telling you about, and so you can see the size of the one on the top right.
Yes.
And this is from the feeling of gratitude. And that's what I would see in perfect, pristine, healthy spring water. That's what I always look for. And frustration and anger is there's actually a thickening of the ice. That's what's so interesting. They're very, very similar, which is interesting. But I also did those ones at the same time. That might have an impact, but there's a thickening. And so I really took that because I noticed there was thickening in other things, and I wanted to show you what they were. So thickening is very weird and unusual, but relevant. It's very important, I think, to notice. So like the top one, you can see that there is the top left, that's the crystallography of gratitude. And the bottom one is that feeling of anger. But the middle one, you can see that's spring water. That's what I would like to see in a good, healthy spring water. But after being exposed to 5G tower, I sat it beside the tower for 15 minutes. And you can see it's thickened. It's totally thickened and come over almost like I don't know, it's almost so strange. And then I took a natural pH 9.9 spring water, and that's the kind of water that actually healed my body. It was one of its unique properties that's straight up actually out of the aquifer. Its pH was 9.9. So it's one of the highest, most alkaline waters naturally occurring that I've personally found. But then I did the ionized version of a 9.9, and I saw a thickening as well. That kind of happened. So that was a very interesting observation.
What conclusion do you draw from that? Just that these emotions cause the thickening? Is there a metaphor at least there that? What
I believe, I'll go back to it real quick, is that with each one, there is an electronic, like an electric component. So our thoughts are electric, essentially, and I have a frequency. So the frequency of gratitude is very different than the frequency of frustration or anger. Gratitude is a chosen response. Like, okay, so that was like kind of interesting. So
we were just talking about electromagnetic influence on water, and then our connection went bad. So
it went bad. It's so interesting. But yeah, the similarities with this for me are that all of the water has been influenced by some kind of EMF. Essentially, thoughts create electrical impulses of different frequencies. So the frequency of gratitude is really different than the frequency of frustration and anger, which is kind of a knee-jerk reaction rather than a chosen reaction, whereas gratitude is very much a chosen thought, of a way of expressing. 5G is obviously electromagnetic, and ionized water has an electrical component within it as well. So it seems that it's the frequency that is being the thing that is somehow fomenting this thickening in the ice. Again, like it'd be interesting to see what's, a more scientific view of that would be, but I just present what I keep seeing. What I'm really good at is observing patterns, and I can remember pretty much all the different pictures. If I see something that looks similar, I've seen that before, and I'm able to go back and find it. And so when I see these patterns develop, they're showing me something important. It's up to us to pay attention.
You know what this reminds me of? Back to Dr. Cowan again. I don't know if you've read his book on cancer. It's called Cancer and the New Biology of Water.
Yeah.
But it reminds me of this phenomenon a little bit. I don't know if there's a parallel, but he says basically what cancer is when there's a breakdown in the water, in the cytoplasm, in your cells, and that could be influenced by EMFs, bad emotions, stress, all these things you're describing. And what happens is, if I understand correctly, as the water breaks down, it loses its structure, and I guess it loses its charge, and the molecules start to bond together more closely than they should naturally. Good healthy cells should have a good charge and be spaced apart. So it loses the charge due to the breakdown in the water, and all these cells clump together, and that's how you get this big, thick tumor, this cancerous growth. which is a thickening, which is kind of reminiscent of what you're showing here. So I don't know if there's a parallel there, but it reminds me of that.
That really makes sense to me, because years ago, one of the reasons I got interested in water in the first place was because I had a pulmonary embolism. After 8 surgeries after a car accident, they found that I was having bowel surgery, but I didn't recover well. And they found that I had showers of blood clots in my lungs. And they wanted me to be on warfarin for a certain period of time. And I was fed that fear, even though I was young and healthy and strong. But I was surprised that it happened to me. But after so much anesthetic and so many surgeries, it had an impact. And so a friend of mine who was a doctor, after I'd done this sort of 3 or 4 months or however long I did, they saw that my chest was clear of clots. But he is a medical doctor, but practiced Ayurvedic medicine. He said, if you can find a natural high source of alkaline water, it might be able to help to stabilize your body and get it back into balance. Yeah. But what was happening is that there was this thickening that called rouleaus when the blood starts to kind of form clots and become very sticky.
Yeah.
And that's a very serious problem. So again, this thickening kind of is, it is very, very interesting when you start putting these links together. And that's where I think this work has so many benefits, and that you can take a lot of what is being explained, but then look at the crystallography of this kind of stuff and see that it's actually supporting the work.
Absolutely.
Now, okay. Now, why are you not going along? I'll have to do this. Oh, I know, because I'm doing this. All right. Okay, so this, we'll just watch it. So I did another test after I did that, and I let the water evaporate. And by the way, unfortunately, I haven't put it in this slide, but I took a photo of it without the influence, and it was all cubic. And that's what you would normally see in salt. It's kind of cubic forms and structures. And that's really another way of showing the power of influence, and it was very cool. So this is just like the introduction to my my step-by-step guide that people can go ahead and get and download. And this is a picture of my book. And it's my website.
Amazing. So first of all, when did the book come out?
So there's been, gratefully, so many people have gone ahead and actually done pre-orders, way more than I ever could have imagined. And it just shows how many people have been supporting my work, which is just mind-blowing. So I think they're starting to get sent out. Actually, the books are starting to get sent out now. So people will be getting the very first copies very soon. And so, yeah, you can just buy it at all the likely places and on my website. And you can also, if you buy the book, you get the guide for free to play with, and you can join the Facebook group, which is called The Secret Intelligence of Water, CMP Lab, where I'm only allowing people that are actually doing the work in, because it's not for just people that are just curious to see what's going on. It's actually like a workshop, where we can all interact together. And so that's super fun, and it's lovely to be able to see people's enthusiasm for being able to see things up here. One lady, it was very cool. I can't remember what, she's a chemist or biologist or something. And she reached out to me, and she had done this. So she had her petri dish of water that was sitting opposite her freezer before she put it in the freezer. And so she pulled it out, and there was this big, very specifically shaped question mark. And she was like, what's going on with the question mark? Because she didn't know what that was about. And then the penny dropped for her. How we put all kinds of, well, you might not, but I do, put all kinds of stuff on your freezer, like your kids' pictures and magnets and whatever. She had all these different things, but the one thing she'd taken off that had been on her freezer for years and years and years, she'd only taken it off a few days before, where there was a question mark, the exact same type of shaped question mark, and it just said question war. And so water had showed her the one thing that was missing on her freezer.
Whoa.
It's like super interesting. And there's a lady recently in the group has did an influence with like some kind of fairy or something, a picture of one, and got some pretty cool results. And it's growing quickly, and people are getting excited about it.
I bet it is so much fun, though, to see the creations that we'll call them your students come up with.
It is so much fun. And what's fun is that, like I said in the beginning, before we really properly started the talk, is like the more people that get excited about water and see it not just as some kind of commodity or resource. Like, I think water is source, not just a resource. And so when we think and start to interact with water, and we see that we're getting a response. So if something responds to us, what does that mean to you as a person? Like, I'm not asking you specifically, but that's the question that people start asking themselves when they do it for themselves. And a lot of people are very reluctant to it. It means you have to have a change of mindset, a kind of almost change of paradigm. It's like if water is responsive and has an intelligence, but we are always branding nature with the human yardstick. If we stop doing that and we recognize there's intelligence in all nature, then what's in all nature, the one thing that's in every living thing, is water.
It's like, so let go of your attachments to what we've all been taught and trying to figure it out. You just let go, right?
It's like Yoda. Yoda said, we must unlearn what we have learned.
I want to hear your Yoda voice.
Oh, no.
No, I'm kidding. I'm curious if the type of person and their mindset impacts the images that you see, or if someone who is totally right brain, like not to stereotype, but a high level business CEO for a massive corporate organization that would not be open to something like this versus, let's say, like an enlightened yogi. Do you think the water cares? Like, if they both said the same word or thought the same thought, is the water going to respond differently to those different people?
Oh, one thing I know about very high-powered business people, and I know several, is that they are very creative in the way that they think. They have to think well ahead, and they're very strategic. So they're very used to actually using their minds in a sense, in a creative way, which it might not seem like that, but in fact, they're quite brilliant. And that, I love being able to see how people think, and I see the amazingness, essentially. This is very...
It's a good word.
But, in every person. And so when it's like almost a judgment to think that water wouldn't show up for them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so all I would say to anyone that wants to do this, that has actually got so far to go, okay, I'm just going to try this, is rather than go, I just want to prove this wrong, because that's a thought, of course, where you might, because I can't tell you what water's going to do, because I don't know, is that it might, just not show you imagery, that it might surprise you. You don't know. But I would suggest to those people, just go in with a sense of curiosity. If the very science-minded people, and I embrace all. I just think that that's the key. Water isn't sitting in judgment. It will enter the body of, it enters the body of all different kinds of people without question, including all different types of animals and plants and everything. It goes in places we would never want to go. It's flushed down the toilet constantly. It is so humble and without judgment. And that is the beautiful thing that I see in water. So many things that I'm saying are just facts as well, is that water, essentially came from asteroids. And then it has all these crazy anomalous properties that don't make sense, which is why so many people don't want to study water, because it doesn't conform. It's hard to study. And then it also, by molecular count, we're 99% water. And by volume, we vary between sort of 65 to 75%, depending on our age, body shape, weight, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
So we're all of this water content from somewhere we don't even know where it came from. And that it is constantly recycling on Earth that we see. It's always reincarnating. And it is very much, and without it, we can't live. It is literally the lifeblood of the planet and of us. And the fact that there's this marriage between salt and water, that's like between awareness and memory. And so it is, very practical. You boil it down. You literally look at the human body without, obviously there's all kinds of little things we can study in medical science and this, but it's just water, salt, minerals, and consciousness, really. And then we look at that, and you really start to think about this, and then you start looking and do the research. And that's why I always say, do it yourself. Have fun, explore. Because at the very least, I say to people, when you start working with water, please try not to go into it with an expectation of, right, show me this or show me that. I always think just don't do anything. Just let it see what it will do. Let it show you the patterns that it would form, that it forms in its natural state. Look what tap water looks like. Look what spring water looks like. See what the signature pattern of your water is. Try taking a sip of it and then putting some of that into the water and see how that changes it. Like that's something I do with the children. I go into schools and I donate, some time once a month teaching water science in primary schools. And I do some of this, I kind of mix it with an art project in science, and we do this kind of work with children. They get amazing, amazing stuff coming out of there because their minds are just so open and there's no expectation. And I think that that's the key. We get disappointed when our expectations are not met. But when we go into something just with an open mind, everything suddenly becomes interesting and of relevance.
It's like some of the best images you showed in your presentation were the ones where it was accidental and there wasn't, some preconceived idea of what you wanted it to be. So that makes total sense.
Yeah, I think you just got to have a bit of fun with it too. And I think forming relationship. This one lady, she said to me, she studied trees, and she's came from an Indigenous perspective, and she said that she speaks to trees, right? I know that's totally out there for some people, but from an Indigenous point of view, many Indigenous people would totally appreciate that fact. And she said the tree said that when she applies her consciousness towards the tree, it allows the tree's sap to absorb more light. And then she said she studied bees, and she said she'd stare at the beehive and watch the bees coming and going for ages. And then one bee came out and said to her, look, we don't mind you looking at us, but would you mind not doing it for so long? Because your consciousness is putting too much light into the hive. And so I took that and I thought, well, perhaps the connection that I'm making with water is adding more light into the water. Because, you know, as Jerry Pollack talks about the fourth phase of water, there are various properties that make it different. It's slightly more alkaline. It has a negative charge. It has a more viscosity. It absorbs more light. And so, you know, I thought, well, that's a very interesting thing. And then I think about bonds. We have bonds between people. There's all different kinds of bonding. There's chemical bonding, the relationship between oxygen and hydrogen and water, it's obviously. But then there's bonds between people. There are invisible bonds that we have. And so I think that, you know, I'm just coming from my own perspective, is that the bond that I have with water, this emotional bond, kind of creates this observance, so that rather than showing me everything that it sees within a test, like it can do, it could do that, it could show me so much information. But because I'm focused on one thing, let's say it's the hand, then water will reflect that hand back at me because it's paying close attention. There's an attention span that's held because of the bond, the kind of friendship that we have. So we look at how we relate to people, and there's some people we don't really pay attention so much strongly to what they might be saying. But if someone we really care and respect about, we will pay attention and we will focus on what they're saying. We won't notice all of what's going on around us. And so that's one of the things I found. The closer the bond you have with water, the more specific the imagery can get.
That's beautifully said. And yeah, I can't help but think of my interactions with loved ones, and how when you do get locked into that moment, when you're having a deep conversation and you're not distracted by your phone or the TV or whatever else in life, that's when you have these true connections. So there's a lot of parallels there. Mm-hmm. Oh, Veda, thank you. This has been really mind-blowing and enlightening, and I can't thank you enough. We showed people your website and your book, but for those that will be listening via audio, could you tell everybody where to go to check out more of your work?
Sure. Yeah, it's my name. It's Veda Austin, VEDA Austin, AUSTIN, or one word, lowercase.com. And I share loads of videos, and my podcasts are on there, and lots of examples of my work. So I try to give away as much as I can because I think it's so important. And there's a link to going to buy the book, or if you don't want to, you can just buy the guide itself. Yeah, I think that's everything. I mean, I'm slowly getting a presence on Instagram. So if anyone wants to follow me, then go ahead.
Yeah. What's the Instagram handle?
It's Veda Austin. I think it's just water researcher. And I haven't done it. For whatever reason, I've only just started getting into Instagram. I feel like a dinosaur, but anyway.
No, it's probably a good thing that you're, not too into it.
Yeah, but I've got a really active Facebook page, which is mine. I have my personal page, and then there's Veda Austin researcher, water researcher, and there's lots of info there. I share daily on that page.
Awesome. Well, we'll link up to all those things in the show notes so people can easily access that. Last question, what's on the horizon? Are there some new things you want to try? New paths you want to go down?
I swear I could be doing this work for the next 9 lifetimes, probably more. But, people have been sending me some ideas, and there's a lot of work that I'm doing around things that really interest people, like within the health realm, like proving that water can change its structure through various modalities. For example, like Reiki and thought and different types of things like that. And some of that's touched on in my book, but I will be doing some more of that. I'm going to be asking some pretty profound questions to water, Like, you know, it's just, there's this endless amount of things you can do, but some really small specific questions. Like one of the questions I'm curious about is like, what's at the very bottom of the ocean?
Ooh.
And I don't know that we've ever discovered anything at the very, very bottom. We've never gone so far down. We know more about up there almost than we know about down there.
Right.
I'd be very curious to know about that. And you know, it's just, I could say, show me the world in 20 years. You know, there's endless things you can. So I kind of would like to do one whole section of just questions, really interesting, curious questions that I can ask water. And then, I mean, like, I'd love to do a series of specific kinds of ones. And I'm also going to do an art exhibition of my work.
I love that.
Yeah. And I've done some amazing stuff with egg white, which would blow your mind, the crystallography that I've taken, which is a whole nother thing. And that's going in an artistic direction, but it's got a lot of merit to it, which is a whole hour talk, which I won't get into.
Yeah, well, I mean, these photographs are pieces of art. You know, they could stand alone as just beautiful pieces of art. So I could totally see this beautiful art gallery selling your photographs, and see that doing very well. So
Yeah.
that's exciting. There's a billion directions you could go with this stuff.
Oh, there's so much. And I'm always open to suggestions as well. So.
All right. Well, good stuff. Well, thank you again. It was a real pleasure having you on, and let's stay in touch. I'm going to experiment with this. I'm going to buy the book and the program, and my kids are really excited about this. And it's one of the few things they actually like listen to me. I'll try to teach them something, you know, but they got all into it. It helps to have these photographs that I can show.
Yeah.
But I told them I'm gonna learn how to do it. I'm gonna get some petri dishes and we're gonna play with it. So I will send you what I come up with, and you let me know what you think.
Oh, it sounds like fun. I look forward to it.
All right.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you again.